Hey guys, welcome back. Today I thought I'd do a short video on how you can use Ableton's LFO to add a bit of movement to your track. So let's have a look. So you might be familiar with LFOs in Ableton already. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator or oscillation, and is basically a low frequency signal which can be used to modulate or change other parameters. The LFO in operator, for example, can be used to change the frequencies of the oscillators in the synth or change the filter cutoff. The brilliant thing about Maxwell I's LFO is that it can be mapped to modulate almost any parameter in Ableton, and that is what we're going to be using to create movement and variation throughout our track. So I'm in Ableton and I've created a simple loop just to demonstrate how we can use Ableton's LFO to create a bit of movement in our tracks. So if we listen to it first. So you can see it loops, but there's not much variation to any of the elements. It all sounds quite repetitive. So how can we add that? Well, we can use the LFO. Now, where would we find that? It's another good question. The LFO is a Maxwell Live tool. So if we click on Maxwell Live and under audio effects, you'll see it here. Now we're going to use it on the hats to give them a little bit more character. Now, if I drag it onto the hats, you'll see it pops up here. Now, the thing that stands out is this waveform in the middle. The waveform is what is being used to affect the other parameters which you map the LFO to. Now, to add a little bit of character to these hats, I'm going to solo them first so we can hear what they sound like on their own. Nice little groove, but we can make it more interesting by adding the vocoder effect. Now, that's sounding a little nicer, but it's not necessarily changing or evolving over time, and that's what we want to get. So what we can use is the LFO to modulate the dry wet of this effect. Now if I click map and click on the effect itself, now you can see the dry wet on the effect is changing from 0 to 100 in a kind of smooth motion, and that's because it's being modulated by this LFO in a sine wave. Now when the sine wave reaches its peak, you'll notice that the dry wet is also reaching its peak at 100%, and vice versa. When the sine wave hits its lowest point, you'll notice that the vocoder dry wet is also at its lowest. If we listen to this again, you can hear that the sound is changing and evolving. What we can do is slow down the rate to slow down how slowly the sound changes. See, it's now at its peak, and now it's getting reduced. Or we could increase the rate so that the dry wet is rapidly switching between 0 and 100%. Now this is starting to sound a little bit better, adding a little bit more movement, but what we can also do is change the wave up. Instead of using the sine wave, which is a nice slow curve, we can switch to random. Random is now going to give us a random number between 1 and 100. Now if we increase the rate, you'll notice that we're getting random percentages of the vocoder's dry wet. So if we listen to it now, you'll notice everything's changing. However, maybe the vocoder is coming a bit too strong. So what we can do up here is limit how much the LFO is affecting our effects dry wet. So we can take it down to 50, which was our max earlier. And you can now hear it's not overstepping and implying too much. We can also increase the minimum so that our minimum will be 20%. So that there is always a bit of vocoder being added. Now this is one way that you can add a little bit of movement and variation, and that LFO will constantly be changing the value of that vocoder's dry wet throughout the track, and you'll get something different each time. Now you don't have to use random to add movement to your tracks. Obviously we used sine earlier. You can use triangle waves or square waves to really give your track a little bit of movement. It's also worth noting that you can add extra jitter to the wave by increasing this, and this adds extra randomness to it. If we listen to that. And we can smooth the wave out as well using the smooth parameters. Now, other things to note are that you can set the offset to be 100% or minus 100%. Minus 100% means that the wave is starting at its lowest point and then moving up from there. 100% is the opposite. It's starting from its highest point and coming down. The only other things to note really are that the phase affects where it starts, hold holds the signal, and retriggers the signal every time you press it. Now if we listen to the hi-hats with the LFO and vocoder added to it with the rest of the track, we'll hear that there is a little bit more movement to it, and the hi-hat has a really nice driving rhythm to it. That's it. This is it with the vocoder and the LFO. If we hear it without. And you'll notice the variation that the LFO and vocoder paired together on the hi-hats is giving. It's really giving a movement to the drum track and creating this nice variation, which makes it far more interesting. One other thing to note is that you can also modulate more than one parameter with the LFO. Clicking here will allow you to map another parameter, say the crunch of the drum bus, for example. There's a lot that you can modulate with, and that's not to say that you have to use the same LFO. You can use one LFO, which is modulating using a random wave, while you have a second LFO modulating different parameters using a sine wave, for example. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned something from it. Stick around because there'll be another video like this next week, and get creative and start using the LFO in creative ways. Peace.